Okay, so I'd like to get started, and I guess there's two things that we're interested in talking about, and I'm not sure which one to talk about. So the first subject is wireless radiation, which is all the stuff from our cell phones and routers and Wi-Fi's, and that's the topic that we've spoken about at every Real Truth About Health conference. And then there's a new topic, I guess it's not new, but it's newer, and it's 5G. And that one seems a little, well, they both are concerning. This seems a little more out of control. So I guess I'd like to open up by asking each of you to be very brief, just take 3 minutes, and just tell us what exactly we should be concerned about. In other words, most people are not talking about this in regular mainstream circles, and yet you're talking about this a lot. So either you're making a big deal about something that's not a big deal, or a lot of people are not getting the information and not informed. So if you could each open up with what is on your mind, why are you writing books about this? Why are you talking about this? Why are you lecturing? Why are you putting all your life's focus on this topic? What is on your minds? And even with Gabriel and Brian, you have thriving health and nutrition practices, and all of a sudden this is something that both of you are speaking about. So if you guys could explain what's going on with these topics, why you're talking about it, and bring us up to date with what's on your mind about this. Push the button.
I think that 5G and wireless in schools, it's all connected, because the amount of exposure we have now in schools is not safe. And we're talking about increasing those levels drastically using all kinds of new devices that are going to be interconnected, testing 5G in schools, and it really requires everyone coming together on this issue to protect our kids, because they will have a lifetime of exposure to this. And whereas in other countries where they're removing the wireless, especially for the younger kids, and having those conversations, in the United States, we're just beginning that process in terms of having that conversation. So I think that this is an emergency in our schools, actually. And we have a lot of work to do.
Well, I couldn't agree any more that it's an emergency. It's very serious. My role in life, Steve brought up, what are you guys doing all this other work and 5G? And it's because the very life of the planet is affected. Like we talk about the global electric circuit, which has to do with all our physiology for all life, not just humans, all life. And we have the Schumann resonance. When that's disrupted, lowers the melatonin, that's connected to cancer, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and a host of other things, particularly mental problems, anxiety, paranoia, depression. Really well documented. There's over 10,000 papers. Some people say 25,000. I'll stick with 10,000 that show that 2, 3, and 4G are causing problems. So I see the 5G issue as a major threat to not just all of humanity, but to the whole living planet. So that's why I'm talking about it.
When they created electric, they realized that it was hazardous for human bodies and human cells. So eventually they made it so they put rubber on that, natural rubber, latex, that in some way neutralized it. When they rolled electronics out, they also knew that it was dangerous. How can you not imagine that we can communicate thousands and thousands of miles distance, and this invisible wiring doesn't permeate you and other life forms? So of course it is. But when they really became bizarre is with 5G. And I'll elaborate on this later, but try to be concise now. I've had meetings starting 4 years ago. I've actually added a class that I personally teach at Hippocrates on this particular subject. because a former CIA official came through Hippocrates Health Institute and warned me about this. And I was hoping he was wrong. Every once in a while, this stuff becomes so overbearing to me. You know, I want to think something's normal, but sadly, the older I get, it's very hard to find normal in our world. And what he told me, it was really hard to believe. But he said, for 3 generations, 5G has been used to maim people. We also have a podcast and a radio program. It's on every Sunday morning at 9. And I interviewed a young man, philanthropic young man, who made a incredible documentary that, please write this down and please view it. It's called 5G Apocalypse. And there it, much more in detail, gave me information from ex-military people, how they used it in my heritage, in the Irish, in Northern Ireland, and how they would put people in hospitals, et cetera. So this comes out of the Pentagon, and they just rolled it off the shelf. And later I'll tell you about how 4 months ago I had a meeting with the gentleman who rolled this out in Europe.
I can tell you why I wrote the book. It's because on the research side, the science side, there was a preponderance of evidence that directly linked the use of technology, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, cell phone use, directly to very serious problems with cancers and a far more greater set of intrusion to the body that has created dysfunction of the body, and sometimes it breaks the body down, and it's critical because of the exposures. And it was saddening me that we had so much evidence, yet no one knew. It wasn't common knowledge. If you know the courts, they argue that you should have known about it. We didn't know about it. So we were pretty frustrated that there was so much science we knew. We understood the mechanics of the breakdown to the body, and none of us knew it. So that's why we wrote the book. And why now? It's so pervasive, almost every child. There are more toilets in the world. There are more people using cell phone than toilets in the world. It's pervasive use, and all our devices are generating emissions. So all of a sudden you're in an environment where these many sources of emissions that potentially can be dangerous to you. And 5G, and I can only extrapolate, makes it worse in time. Why I extrapolate? Because there's no research. We really don't know. But I can tell you at 20 gigahertz, your immune system is impaired. It suppresses your immune system itself, and the bugs in your gut love it. It propagates the gut, not necessarily the bad or the good, but the bad as well. And so I thought it was time to let as much as I knew about it and try to share it with you. So that's why I wrote the book.
So let's start from the beginning. So what is 5G? Where is it? How does it affect me and my family? And are there any studies that talk about the health effects of it?
5G is the latest and newest technology being pushed by telecommunications companies that promises to have faster downloads. But what it requires, in addition to billions of new interconnected devices, are millions of new short cell towers in front of our homes. And there's actually a lot of research showing that the technology that we have now, and those frequencies will be used in 5G, is harmful at low levels, as you were just talking about. So we don't expect 5G to be necessarily safer because it's using higher frequencies and the lower frequencies that we're using now.
As I mentioned before, there's over 10,000 papers that show 2G, 3G, and 4G are dangerous. Other research has shown 5G is at least 100 times more dangerous, more powerful. So let's just start there. We're dealing with something at least 100 times more deadly. Now, I do a lot of work with diabetes, and what we know with cell phones and all the electromagnetics is that people are becoming more electrosensitive. Around the world, it used to be 3%, now it's 10%. I have clients who literally have to go out into the wilderness to control their blood sugar. Literally, I don't mean metaphorically. And because when they get into anywhere, cities and so forth, it's like their blood sugar is completely out of control. We know the cell phones are associated with increased parotid cancer and brain cancer. That's just a fact, okay? And our kids are more vulnerable because their skulls are thinner. So my focus, first of all, I have the education, and really it's a political question and an awareness question. The second level, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later, how do we protect ourselves? So I spent a lot of time with that and have come up with some levels of 5G protection. I even have a little video how I'm able to walk up right to a 5G tower and not be affected by certain things you can wear. But it's a more of a global problem. We're looking at where we live. We're looking at our windows being openings for it. We're looking at the smart meters, which are not too smart, affecting us. And they can target these things with the 5G. We're looking at our houses, our homes, our skin, our sweat glands are like antennas for the 5G. So it has to be approached on multiple levels to personally protect ourselves and our family and our houses. And we'll talk about that in a little bit later. But the most important thing, obviously, is political, getting them to stop it. I am working with a group who has been successful in certain ways, not with 5G, but by suing or threatening liens against major corporations for doing these things, and they're just completing, I just heard about it 2 days ago that they read it to me, a way that we can put liens against these major corporations who are bringing 5G to this world. So that's really, because we're not really going to, the politicians are compromised. But people listen to money, and if you know that there's a lien that's going to be charging you, $25,000 a day, you're going to think about it. And there has definitely been some victories, particularly around the use of smart meters. So there are things we can do, protecting ourselves and also acting politically. So that's kind of where my focus is, more on the protection, but the political protection with the liens. I'm not sure how we're going to get that out, but maybe through the newsletter or something like that. It's just almost ready, but it's not quite there yet. It's a really, really good document. So those are things we can do, but we have to see it, the global picture. As I said, the global electric circuit that controls all our physiology for all life on the planet, as well as the Schumann resonance, which is in essence the pulse or heartbeat of the planet. We're all resonating with that. Our hearts and our brains particularly are affected by the Schumann resonance, and when they start with the 5G, it's kind of predicted this is going to alter that Schumann resonance and throw off the whole synchronicity of us with life on the planet and also our heart and our brain function. So they're big issues. We have some solutions, both personally and politically.
So to chime back on your question, Stephen, I'll try to make this as understandable as I can. Let's imagine 1G was 10 strands, invisible strands, that interconnected you to other cell phone users and Wi-Fi users, etc. When they went to 2, it was about 200 strands. They went to 3, it was about 3,000 strands. When they went to 4, it was about 40,000 strands. Now they've gone up to 400,000 strands. And so we always have thought in previous physics that the larger the stimulant or stimulation, the more effective it would be. As a matter of fact, therapeutically, in my energy medicine department, that was what we thought until 1982 or 3. But Einstein, who spoke 110, 111 years ago now, basically said it's a subtle frequency that allows our entire workings, anatomical workings, function, but also connects this subtle energy, us to all other life forms. Not only you to other people, but you to other life, as Gabriel just pointed out. And that was really termed in not too long ago years called zero-point gravity. And this is one of the remedies for it, and I'll describe that later. So this frightening part of this is that this is something that has been used to hurt people. We're not talking about, this is a theory, this is a philosophy. Yes, there's research and 10,000 or 25,000, but none of that research basically says the military and the Pentagon has been using it. I'm here to tell you they have been using it, 5G. That's what they've been doing. And do I think it's some conspiracy to wipe people out? Well, I would hope not. I think it's greed, as always. Greed is usually at the core of all insanity. And so let's leave it at that, but the first I proposed is a possibility. We don't know that. Right now in Austria, they're working on very thick wood homes and finding, just like you said, through windows, making particular forms of windows that you can't have this permeate, and they're getting pretty good success. In my own personal home, I put lead walls in, and they don't look like a lead wall, so you're in some kind of a nut house. They look just like the board you put up normally. You pay extra. You can get these through Home Depot and Lowe's, and you put that up, and it blocks these types of things. Now, the average person is going to say, well, how much does that cost? A lot of money. And so at least start with the room that you stay in, the room your children stay in. We start with that. And then in the future, if you're ever building a home, everything from the roof down has to be protected with that. We put together technology with Russians and Germans called high pulses, and this has overwhelming evidence behind it. We've been using it now for 2 years at Hippocrates. The individuals that Gabriel mentioned that are hypersensitive and have to really be totally away from cell towers, they're called universal conductors. And because we help all kinds of people, very sane people who want to remain healthy and young, and very sick people who don't want to die, we have a lot of these universal conductors come. So over the last 2.5 years, we've actually been observing how they're able to take lead vest off with these new technologies and everything else.
Just for a second, I want to add that this is military technology. It's acknowledged. I've mentioned 20 years, you're mentioning several generations, which is even worse, right? And it is about mind control, and it is about control. It does affect your mind. It affects whether you're going to be angry or happy, or they can affect your brain, and that is proven. That's not really debatable in the military circles, and I think that's the key thing to keep them aware. And so what's their intention? It doesn't matter. Mind control is not really very good for your spiritual evolvement, because you have to be free to go beyond all the barriers to wake up. So this is going to block that, puts a ceiling on our mental and spiritual development. That's a big issue, but it is mind control, it is explicit, and they know exactly what they're doing.
Let me just preface so that you're clear on how that happens. Our base brain, we have a 3-layer triune brain. You have the reptilian brain. That came 150, 200 million years ago. And then you have the neocortex. That's where empathy and compassion, that's when animals stopped eating babies, their own babies. And then you have the neo, and that's your higher self. That's insight, hindsight, etc. When you get these frequencies, the message your body's getting is you're under a whole lot of pressure, stress. And so we immediately go into the cave and stay in the reptilian brain and can't use the higher consciousness, the empathy, the compassion. So we become manipulated by the own factuality. Our anatomy was originally like that.
I'm going to touch on a little bit about what Dr. Gabriel just said and put it into practice, and then I'll talk about the 5G. When there was Cuba and the embassy was being attacked, there was this big question, what was going on? What Gabriel said is they know from military experience that they can generate a specific frequency to get a specific response in the human body. It's a very precise military process. So when I heard it, I laughed because I knew exactly what they were doing when everyone was confused. It's been around for years and years, as Dr. Gabriel said. So I want to answer and Theodora, actually, you said an important point. It was the small cell tower that's really the new part of the network that the most disconcerting. And I'm going to tell you why. Sub-gigahertz frequencies are what we roughly operate at today. So Sprint announced a 5G service. It's a part of the fabric of service, but it's all sub-gigahertz range. It's 600 megahertz. It's much, much lower. It's the TV range that existed that's been reallocated by the FCC for 5G use. But when you look at that infrastructure that's becoming new, it's an interconnection to the house. When it gets to the house in front of your home, it's 23 gigahertz. It's 60 gigahertz. It can go up to 300 gigahertz. What does that mean? What they're doing is increasing the frequency rate, and by the way, 23 gigahertz is 23 billion cycles per second. When you have 6 gigahertz, it's 6 billion cycles per second, so it's an order of magnitude higher frequency rate. But this is what's different, and this is what's concerning. The wattage that's being transmitted from the cell tower right in front of your house is 20 watts. A cell tower 5 miles away uses 60 watts. And all of a sudden, you're being bombarded with an emission at 20 watts to get into your home. That's not all. It turns out that with 4G and 3G and 2G, they used digital signals. They encode the signal, and it can be TDMA, CDMA, GSM. There's a lot of different ways of encoding. Those encoding impact the body differently. And so when you talk about a breakdown of a cell, you're talking about the constant pulsing, the on and off to the body, to the cell, and that breaks it down. With 5G, there are 2 of those. It's beaming that takes 2 signals and converges that onto the cell phone. That's very different. And we know if you look at the history of the testing and the study work that we've done on 1 signal, you now have 2. Is that going to impact the body? Well, we know 1 does. What will 2 do? I don't know. But we know it may have an effect on the body, and that's why we have such concern. It's the higher rates, it's the higher power levels, and it's the way it's being transmitted that is potentially endangering our bodies.
Add something? There's also, and if you go to we've tried to put everything up online, but we've had a lot of medical conferences and scientific conferences where we have physicists who have looked at the impact of the higher frequencies on the sweat gland and found that the sweat gland acts as an antenna, and it preferentially, very intensely is absorbed into certain structures in our skin. But also, the antennas are going to have everything that we have now, and in addition, 5G. So it's not that they're going to swap something out and put something in. They're actually going to add it on. And then phones, which will cost, I think they cost over $1,000 right now, so majority of people don't have them. But they'll come down in price and time. They will have both the 4G technology, and they'll also have the 5G on it, and it'll be able to toggle back and forth. So if you ever hear that oh, don't worry, 5G is just going to bounce off your skin and all of that. That is not true on so many levels. First, it doesn't bounce off your skin. It affects your skin. It's going into your skin. And then also, it's going to have all the frequencies we have now that are documented to have harmful effects in a substantial body of published research. So, just wanted to add that.
Okay, so just to clarify and sum up, if someone is completely selfish, doesn't care about anything or anyone, they only care about themselves and have no interest in anything but themselves, what exactly is the reason for them personally that they don't want 5G towers going up and 5G Sprint or Verizon going up? What exactly is the concern to them in the next 5, 10 years to a person who doesn't care about this subject, doesn't care about anything? What exactly is their concern about this technology? How will it affect them?
I want to add one small thing and then go on that answers that question. So there's research where they've looked at communities where they put in the small cell deployment. Not necessarily 5G, because that's only in test cities and not everyone's using 5G technology, but they've looked at cities. This is on our website on Science on 5G. They looked at some cities, and then they also looked at cities that didn't have the small cell infrastructure. And it is documented that the everyday, nonstop levels of radio frequency radiation are increased quite substantially in some areas from having all of these antennas in front of homes, which you would expect. So it will overall increase the levels that we're exposed to. I wanted to just add that.
It's, first of all, you don't want to go into fear on this because there are ways to go about approaching protecting yourself on the different levels. And maybe, if it's okay, I'll kind of go into that. So we have, and again, up on the video, a thing you can make, I call it a quantum card. It's not something I make or anything, but it really gives you protection. I walked right up at 125 yards. People are weakened. They put this on, we can walk up 10 yards right to these 5G towers. So that's personal. We have ways to protect the windows. I'm working with a friend who's head of the Tachyon, where you just put these systems, you don't need lead walls. It's not a bad idea, but you don't need lead walls. And you can put these on the windows and they block the energy. You can also wear, we're calling it the 5G pendant, so to speak. And it's something you can wear, it builds your field. And I'm going to bring you to another understanding in a moment. The other thing is, believe it or not, with CBD oil and coconut oil, taconized, it actually helps your field regenerate. So here's the, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. So taconized is a increased amount of energy in your field. There's a lot, I'm trying to make it simple. And what we see when we use taconized CBD in coconut oil, it actually keeps regenerating your field. So think about 5G, as you were explaining, it's constantly hitting you, constantly creating free radicals in your system, constantly knocking your field out of order. So the oil on your skin, the CBD taconized oil, which again, it's kind of a super protector. It is constantly regenerating your field. Just think about that. So it's hitting you and it's regenerating. So we have a constant regeneration of the field. The whole idea is that it's not blocking the 5G like lead or the tachyon discs to the windows. I live in walls are 3 feet deep, and they're soil-based. It's called rammed earth. That's going to knock out most of it, but the point I'm making is you can put these devices on your windows, on your smart meters, which are amplifying it. We want to block the smart meters. You can put them in your car, like a taconized mat, and that is giving off a field that supports your field. That's probably the best way to understand it. So we do have ways to handle it, except it has to be stopped on a bigger basis for all of humanity. That's really what we're talking about here. I have also done research using tech just on the cell phone, and 92% of the people were unaffected by their cell phone, the frequencies coming out. It's about a field that reinforces your field. That's the best way to understand the tachyon. And TACHYON. TACKYON. And the concept here is it's something that rebuilds your field. And I've harassed the Arizona State enough that they're going to take our smart meters out. But remember the company I talked about who's figured out how to legally get smart meters removed, who are also making a thing with 5G with the liens, so they're willing to do that. But it has something for the smart meter. So we're hitting every aspect of our lives with these field regenerating energies. That's the best way I can explain it. And that's what the tachyon is doing. It's not available yet. We're still doing it, but maybe in a month it will be ready. So just personally, you don't have to be in fear. We can really deal with it. And that's the important thing to understand, because we have to keep rebuilding our field. And I'm also going to say that the 5G creates free radicals, and we need to keep taking supplements, which we've talked about in other things, to neutralize the free radicals. So there is a lot we can personally do, but we really need to deal with it on a national level. Now, I'll mention there is over 31,300 scientists who have signed the stopping all use of 5G internationally. This is a group that
Stop 5G in space.
until, say it again?
Stopping 5G in space and Earth, the
That's
international
right.
appeal, yeah.
Stop 5G in space and Earth until there's more research, because there isn't enough research. But we know what we have. If it's going in a certain direction, it actually ends up in that direction. It's not like a mystical thing about research. But also, there's a Friedberg group. There's over 400 scientists with that. So the scientific world's already said this is not good, okay? It's not an argument that needs to be made when you see the bigger picture. The idea is, how do we defend ourselves, and how do we stop 5G from happening around the world? That's really the issue we have to address. Yeah, thank you. So all this information is not ready to be up, but if you go to drcousens.com, within a month it will be up, and we'll have it kind of edited.
So let me tell you what I'm going with this. Most people are not coming to this conference and are not that interested. So we're really going to miss most of the audience. What you have to answer, and the only thing to answer, is for people who don't care about anyone but themselves, exactly what will happen to them. Most people don't care about science. They don't want stories. They're not interested. They want to make money. They're doing their lives. They don't smoke cigarettes because they believe it will affect them. They don't jump off bridges because they think it'll affect them. If we don't clarify exactly why we should be concerned about these phone companies rolling out massive 5G, how it will affect them, we will not get people to join this. Then most people do not think this is an issue. Most people are not responding. I went to a protest. There were 17 of us. We put out email blasts about 5G. They get low ratings. So if you don't explain what's going to happen to a person, they're just tuning us out. So and the question is, if we build towers all over in every town, and they put up these small cells and 5G goes out, how does it affect that person who couldn't care less about health, environment, or the real truth about it?
I'll take the ball on that. Because this is, when I'm teaching my hour-long class, I speak about all of these problems that we can look back. As Gabriel just mentioned to you, we have cumulatively science over generations that tell us all of this technology is bad. We've just told you something the scientific community taught us. We're not physicists, but physicists tell us this is 100 times more damning than everything that's been bad that we know is bad. The organization you represent works with Stanford University, works with the University of California, worked with Yale University, Dr. Davis, my colleague, Dr. Hardell, a Swedish oncologist. He's done research also. This is the people I've been learning from. As a matter of fact, one of the most brilliant things I've seen in the last year is Dr. Davis when she was at the University of Sydney. It was very, very clear. So I can give you a brief thing. Cancer will happen. It's already happening. Stanford showed that children especially, putting cell phones with 2 and 3G, they get cancer tumors. And I can confirm that because I'm dealing with those kids with cancer tumors. They come to Hippocrates in boatloads today, and cancer was non-existent in children when I began my work a half a century ago. We've all mentioned here, and there's evidence of this. This isn't like crazy people with conspiracy theories. They are altering your mind. Are you going to be happy? Are you going to be stressed? Are you going to be anxious? Are you going to sleep well? Are you not going to sleep well? How about your children who can't have babies? 1/3 of the married people in this country and around the world now, in the developed world, as we say, are struggling to have babies. And it gave birth to something called the fertility industry. That, by the way, those poor women hardly have babies, but they show up at Hippocrates with cancer 5 years later, 4 years later, et cetera. And so the side effects I'm now bringing up too. Neurological problems. I've seen a boom in multiple sclerosis, as an example, and other neuron diseases and neuropathies. And people are sitting in front of televisions with cell phones in front of them, laptop computers on their genitalia. I see testy cancers shooting up like this. Used to be a rare thing. I see ovarian cancers. And cervical cancers are viral, but the amplification of cervical cancers. So that's why a person who's only worried about themselves should really worry about this. Now let me expound on this. So I went out of my way 4 months ago when I was in Europe to have a meeting with a man that rolled this out. He's a Portuguese gentleman, a Ph.D., who, by the way, lives in Norway, and they are way ahead of us. So much so that the politicians in Europe are saying, we don't want 5G where our families are, because we know it gives you cancer. We know it's neurological, and we know that governments are going to use this to alter your consciousness. And so in Geneva, Switzerland, and in Belgium, where in Belgium the EU is, Geneva is where the UN is, they've just banned 5G. In Brussels. Brussels. They've just banned it.
Halted it.
Where I live in Palm Beach County, because an illustrious character that's running the country now lives, they're trying to ban 5G. So they don't give a damn about you and your families. They know what's going on, and they're basically saying, we don't want our families to be exposed to what your families can be exposed to. Now, these are not things we're making up here. I'd love any of you to challenge anything that we're saying here tonight. These are factual statements. I only come here to give you factual statements. So there is a overwhelming foundational body of evidence on what previous technology has done. We don't have to wait. You know, it sounds like we're a little tenuous here. We're not tenuous. This shit's bad. It's going to kill you. It's going to kill your children. It's going to amplify disease, and there's no question about that.
I agree with all the things that have been said. I'll try to focus on one specific aspect of 5G, that we're going to see more problems within time and the body's response. We know from Dr. Ali Johansson's work out of Sweden that your immune system is suppressed in up to 4G. We know that that dampens your ability to respond to other illnesses with the suppressed immune, and autoimmune as well, by the way. And so with 4G, remember, there are 10 times more bugs in our stomach than there are cells in the body. So when you start disrupting your immune source, you start disrupting everything about the way your body responds. And this man's going to talk a little bit about probiotics and other things that sort of address those kinds of things. There is study work that was fairly recent on 20 gigahertz. It was around 23 gigahertz. It substantiated the trend from up to 4G and found improved propagation with all virus and bacteria. So you can expect what we know in the 4G world will be amplified in the 5G world, and that's really research that's fairly recent, and other than the 90 gigahertz that I'm sorry, I forgot your name. Theodora brought up, which is sort of an important point. It's right in the middle of the spectrum, but we know the immune system is going to be possibly more hampered, and that's going to mean a lot to making sure your body is at the peak of its health when you're exposed. So if you're an individual, you can expect a worsening immune system response to illnesses in general as a result of the exposure.
It is a really pretty serious thing in the, the fact that they banned it in Brussels tells you something really important, because people know. They know the truth of what's going on. So I'm going to emphasize the mental part, because we are looking at an increase in suicide, depression, and anxiety. Big deal. We're looking at as Brian said, a decrease in fertility, an increase in heart disease, which we haven't mentioned as much, but definitely there's an increase of heart disease and disorganization of the heart function. And heart attacks, obviously, we've been talking about cancer, clearly upping diabetes, environmental sensitivity. So it's really there. And it's, if anybody's reading the literature, it's undeniable. And that's the thing we have to kind of get, the seriousness of it. And that kind of helps us get more serious about how we're going to act towards it. So I think it's good what Steve brought up. Hey, there are problems, and they're undeniable problems, and hopefully that will motivate even the most self-centered person for their own protection.
I want to, thank you. There was a study that was just published. It was funded by the American Cancer Society, and it looked at thyroid cancer and cell phone use. And if you don't know, as was talked about, in children, cancer rates are increasing. Thyroid cancer, lymphoma, as well as brain cancer. And they came out with a report that we have on our website. But this particular study that looked at people who use cell phones for a long time and thyroid cancer, they did one initial epidemiology research, and they found suggestions of an increase. But then they looked, and they did another study, which they published, where they looked at the genetics of the people. And once they identified certain genetic markers, they found a statistically significant association between the thyroid cancer with the increased cell phone radiation exposure. So we're all different. We all have different genetic makeups, and there are people who are more susceptible in which the association has been shown in research. So,
I think you're talking about 3 times more likely to get cancer if you have a predisposition and
they've
that's recently by Yale. They just released that
by
study.
Yale, that's right.
Yeah.
They just put this out.
Yeah.
This is a really important study. And by the way, please contact the American Cancer Society and tell them to update their webpage with this important information so everyone can have it. I'm sure they're trying to figure out what to do right now about this study. I mean, it's they've identified.
So let me preface what you're saying, because I don't want anyone listening around the world or in this room to be confused. It doesn't mean if you have a particular type of gene, you're immune to this 5G and
That's
4G
right.
and 3G.
No.
When you get into science, what you have to know is they look at a specific area, a very isolated, very refined and confined area. And so that's what this study is reporting. So you may be more susceptible, and 99% of you haven't had gene markers done on you. So, and the other ones are going to have problems too. You may not get that particular form of cancer. That's what they looked at. You may end up with cancer in your liver from it. We don't know that.
In addition, bad news about it is that we've seen proof of breakage of the DNA. So when you kind of look at the bigger picture, it's a total assault, again, from the DNA up on the whole living planet, not just the human beings. And as I mentioned, when you disorganize the Schumann resonance and the global electric circuit, all the physiology is disrupted. The electrophysiology and the Schumann resonance, which is kind of what links all of life, not just humans, together, is disrupted. It throws the whole planet, the living planet, out of harmony. And that's what we're really facing. And so it is a direct threat, again, not just to humans, not just the things we're talking about, but to all life on the planet. Now, in addition, they're putting satellites up in what we call the D zone. So I'll mention this. Schumann resonance is the resonance from the Earth up to approximately the D zone. It's somewhere between 37 miles and 55 miles up. And so they're putting the actual satellites right where the resonance is happening. So we're going to look, you're definitely going to see more disruption of the Schumann resonance. And when that's off, as I said, melatonin goes down, more cancer, heart disease, and all kinds of autoimmune diseases are going down. The other thing...
Do you remember how many satellites and outrageous?
20,000.
20,000.
Yeah. And... yeah, so there's lots of kind of pieces with. Another thing that happens is the 5G disrupts the blood-brain barrier. That means that more and more toxins get in the brain, and so it's affecting our brain function on a whole other level, which is the different toxins, the free radicals, all that is disrupting our brain function from this other biological level. So it's a lose-lose-lose until we decide to go win-win-win, which is really up to us, saying this is really important. I don't care how selfish you are, all life on the planet and your life and the life of your children is all under threat. So we have to try really, really hard to get people to wake up to this.
How many have seen the photographs of the dead bees, the dead birds? In the state of California, they believe some of the recent fires were caused by these towers.
So, Theodora, you and Deborah Davis work at Environmental Health Trust. You do great research. When you get your best information, the best studies, the best science, and you present it to politicians, to the media, to influential people in society, what do they say? I mean, how come they're not saying, oh my God, this is urgent, let's do something? Like, what happens with universities, with the media, with the scientific community, with the politicians, with all the government agencies? What is preventing them from hearing your information and sounding the alarm?
The media and politicians and universities are three separate situations, so we do present to all of them. There hasn't been, I want to go to the federal level, there has not been a congressional hearing on cell phone and wireless radiation since 2008 and 2009, and at that time, Dr. Davis presented, as well as several other eminent scientists. You can go online and watch the presentations. What came out of that is the call for a review of the limits by the Government Accountability Office. But then the FCC is captured by agency and is saying there's no problem. So there's work, when word gets out and they hear the information from the scientists, we find that there is action that's taken. At the 5G, New Hampshire Commission on 5G, they are listening to the scientists. We presented to Colorado and cities in California, to the Mexico Telecom Authority. When India, the government of India decided to look at this, they had an interministerial group come together to look at the impact to birds and bees, and they actually made their radiation limits far more protective. They dropped them to 1/10 of what they were before. But they have to have that information, And there has to be a process where they're looking at that information. So for example, we're calling for a congressional hearing. If there's something you can do today, I have an idea of many, but contact your elected officials, show them the letters that have been written by members of Congress who've been presented with this information, and call for a congressional hearing on this issue where the scientists can present the science and the policymakers can hear it. That's one thing. Now, when we talk to the media, I'm going to tell you that we're challenged because they don't have much of an attention span, and they want to hear it really quick, and then they get on the phone and they talk to industry-funded scientists who say there's no problem. And we work really hard, and there have been several pieces that have come out where we have been talking to the reporters. There's a piece coming out soon that I hope it's coming out very soon, really giving them the background. When you have an investigative reporter, they take the time to understand the issue, to look at who they're speaking to and who's funding them. I mean, this is, it's quite a challenge, but it's happening. You can look at The Nation did a report on this. We have several, which we have up on our website, of investigative reports that have been done looking at this issue. But we really need to get to the federal level. At the state level, things are happening. I mean, Vermont, New Hampshire, Oregon just passed a bill to review the effects of radio frequency and wireless in schools with a focus on schools. So that happened by being presented the information. There has to be space to do that. There has to be a forum to present the information so that they can receive it. And we often get shut down because, you know, you can send a million emails, they're not going to read them. There needs to be an official meeting where people have time to speak, not just 3 minutes. We've been doing Zoom, so if you're listening to this and go to your city council, we will do presentations to governments and to counties. Absolutely.
Okay.
So.
And regarding 5G, if there was a tsunami, you have like minutes to get out of the way before the tidal wave comes over. How much time do we have to reverse this? Like if we think about this for like, let's say 10 years and then realize it's a big deal, is that a reasonable strategy? Or are you saying that if that they're immediately building out the network, and if we don't do something in the next week, month, year, 2 years, like how much time, a lot of these people are hearing it for the first time, they didn't realize it was this urgent. How much time do we have to deal with this before it becomes undealable because the whole country is surrounded with these small cells? So how much time do we have so everyone here knows whether this is at the top of their list, the middle of their list, the bottom, like how much time?
Not much. Actually, I want to respond to what Theodora was saying. A friend of mine was on a line recently having lunch. He bumped into Kennedy Jr., who happens to...
Talking to the mic.
He happens to be concerned about kids. My friend explained the problem with what's going on in the FCC. And rather than appeal to the governance body, he's suing the government's body.
We are too with him. Yeah.
What he did was he said the standards that in December 17th that you decided not to address was flagrant incompetence on their part. And what he said is the standards that are thermally based are totally inadequate because everything science knows today is biological. So how we're going to win? Take them to court.
I think that's the point I'm making, how we're stopping smart meters, is when this lien comes out, it's going to go public in a big way, and all these agencies and governments and corporations are going to actually be under, not in the courts now. A lien is something a little outside the court, it's more powerful.
Nobody listened to Theodora a year or two ago because it wasn't that important and imperative to resolve the problems. But all of a sudden, there's a groundswell of interest, and that interest is really helping to bring to the surface the importance of us taking action and pushing our governance bodies at every level and suing them if you have to.
So I have a little question. How do I get those letters you're talking about? On your website?
We
Is there a way
have
of listing
a
that?
section on, if you click on the 5G section.
Go to the website itself.
Oh, yeah, you go to the website, you hover over key issues. You'll see 5G on the drop-down, so you're...
What is the website?
Oh, I'm sorry, it's Environmental Health Trust, ehtrust.org. And we have a page with scientists' letters on 5G, and what we've tried to do is have a compendium every time with right now we just added from Guernsey, where Dr. Davis just traveled and presented to this country. And then they have letters from several scientists. So every time a scientist writes a letter to a country, compiling the science, distilling it down, and saying why that policymaker should do something, we try to collect them and have a place for them. So if you're in your town, you can say, look at this was just written to here. Look at what this scientist is saying. We should be listening to this too. Listen to the scientists. I want to add too, so I think that we do need to have action at every level. At the local, which is where we really have to be working to raise awareness, at the city, the state, and at the federal level. But lawsuits are an important component, and most issues around environmental pollution are ultimately, it's the lawsuit and in court where we end up moving things along. So we are also suing the FCC for the same reason. We believe there will be other groups that are working together on this, because what the FCC did in December, and I talked about it but just briefly, is they said, we've looked at all these submissions by scientists. There are over 1,000 submissions by scientists and people all over writing our federal government saying you need to update your outdated limits. And they said, oh, we looked at it and there's really nothing in there that shows there's a problem. And why? Well, because the FDA says they're basing this on the FDA. Now, the FDA is rejecting the NIH research, and there's literally, I'm not kidding, there's one paragraph in an FDA letter saying, well, we don't think that there's much science showing harm. And is it okay to make a decision based on one paragraph? Without any scientific citations, this is unacceptable. I mean, our children deserve more than this. So that's happening. And there already was a court case that was won on 5G regarding environmental review. The FCC passed regulations that said that their small cells, their 5G infrastructure, oh, it's so small, it doesn't need environmental review. We can just bypass that law. And several Indian tribes sued, as well as Ed Myers, who's one of our lawyers who's working on this new court case, and NRDC, and we won that. Every cell tower, and this is something to think about, so every cell tower that has gone up in the last about year that didn't have an environmental review, every small cell, it needs to be certified as meeting the regulations we have around environmental review. And there's more of that on our site that we're going to be putting up, and you can learn more about that. But there's a lot of work in the legal front that has to be done, and that's happening.
Theodora, tell them about Italy.
Oh, the court case, the Supreme Court?
Yes,
So
the second iteration of that, the last...
the confirmation
right, the
of
confirmation of the position.
So there's also several cases where people have used cell phones for long term, they've developed tumors, and in Italy, there's several court cases where the judge determined, including with the Supreme Court of Italy, that the tumor was related to the cell phone. And this was just it was an appeal, and the telecom lost. And so...
Tell them what the judge said.
Oh, the judge said that, talked about not looking at industry-funded science because
Right.
there was so much...
And he couldn't trust the service providers' data.
Right. And they really only didn't allow industry-funded information to be a part of that decision. And when you remove industry influence from the science, the majority of the research shows effects. So,
So this is also, working with this group using liens, which kind of.
Explain, they probably don't know what it is.
So lien basically says if you don't, here's a problem, if you don't clear it up, you're going to have to pay $10,000 or $25,000 a day. It bypasses the court system, and then they've had some definitely victories on the East Coast regarding smart meters using that approach. Now, that document is very close to being out, and all I can say is, hopefully in a month, go to drcousens.com, and we'll have that information, and you can do it. You don't need a lawyer to do it. It's not going to cost money both ways, and it seems to be more powerful than actually getting winning a suit, believe it or not. So that's one thing to really consider. So drcousens.com, hopefully in a month we'll have what I need to have that up. This is a very, very powerful way of going, which is, I said, defeating the smart meters, which is a really big deal.
Before we go to the next question, I think it's appropriate for everyone here in Long Island, as well as everyone listening now, live, and in the future. I wanted to be very clear that you're not alone. So concisely give your website.
oh,
Yeah.
ehtrust.org.
ehtrust.org. You don't
Yeah.
have to invent the wheel. Dr. Davis created this organization. She, in the United States, basically is the kingpin of this.
Well,
Get a hold of them.
There's several scientific organizations,
Okay.
of which we are one of the leading organizations working on this, I would say. So it's ehtrust.org, and I have a lot of materials here. And if you go to ehtrust.org/trust, you can sign up for our newsletter, and we'll actually immediately get you this information. So we have like posters on 5G and listing, kind of answering your question about the health effects that have been found and some of the problems, what parents need to know about safe technology.
I've blown these up, by the way, for class. You can do it. In your
Yeah.
neighborhood, with your community, with your families. You don't have to just have small things.
thank you.
Go to Kinko, you blow this up, it costs nothing. I present it to hundreds of people sometimes.
Yeah, and we have this one in regular, and then we also have it so that you can actually, you can print it out in large. We have our graphics person to make them so that everyone can have this, and when people around the country give talks, they have this blown up, on the table, like you're doing.
Exactly.
We also have this one on climate change and 5G, looking at energy efficiency, and on the back of this, we actually have a lot more materials, but it's protect yourself, different ways you can reduce exposure. So you can learn how to reduce exposure to the wireless devices and how to use safer technology.
And while
as
you're
well.
so passionate correctly about children, children's skull is not formed. So they are much, 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 much more susceptible to this. Dr. Cousens, in March, who should they get a hold of for this form that you can reject both cell towers as well as 5G,
And
as
smart
well
meters.
as smart meters?
So it's going to be up on drcousens.com.
drcousens.com.
And the documents will be up in a very clear way. And again, you don't need a lawyer to do this. You can make your actions yourself, and it goes directly to the corporations. And it's pretty undefeatable.
Yeah. And how did they get a hold of you, your organization?
The book, radiationnation.com?
radiationnationbook.com.
Yep.
Once again, radiationnation.com.
radiationnationbook.com.
Anyone that's sitting there and
Radiation Nation Book.
yeah, radiationnationbook.com. Anyone that's sitting there listening to this tonight and you're not provoked to save yourself, I know we're all sick. I know we're all weak. I know you've been zapped by cell phones and computers, and you're sitting in front of a computer 8 hours a day. But awaken. Awaken. This is one of the many, many things that you're being assaulted with. Everyone on earth is being assaulted with.
Okay, so my final question on 5G. Assume that someone doesn't watch the Real Truth About Health conference, they keep reading the newspaper of choice, and absolutely nothing changes and things progress as they are. 5G goes up all over the place nationwide. So assume that happens full on, nothing gets slowed or stopped. In 5 years from now, you can go 5 years, then you can go 10, but let's say 5 years and then 10, what exactly is the average person going to experience? Because again, everyone's got to evaluate there's so many things to care about, and they're trying to evaluate, is this really a real urgent thing, or is this like, eventually, so, nothing changes. If nothing changes in 5 years, everything rolled out completely, where are we going to be individually health-wise? And you can go even to 10 years. So tell me what happens if nothing changes and it continues as is planned.
Things are changing. People are actually having success at stalling the rollout of 5G. So,
But if nothing changed, if it just continued full on, where are we going to be?
I think our humanity is at risk, because how are we even going to be interacting with each other with all of these devices, not to mention the electromagnetic fields, the overstimulation of our brain. Our brain goes into fight or flight with all of the screen use, be it wireless or not. I just can't even wrap my mind around the unbridled rollout of this technology. I'm already in shock at where we are now. So I know that scientists are also talking about increased, everything we just talked about, increased cancers and immune system dysfunction. So I have my eye on the prize of slowing this down so that we can have a more responsible look. And we haven't even talked about blue light, which is all wrapped up in this, but you want to add in your thoughts?
Just wrap up 5G.
Oh, 5G, okay.
Okay, so let's, I'm an optimist with most things, but I realize when an international industry has already invested $500 billion, it's going to be very, very hard to slow this down. So it's not going to stop at 5G. They're already working on 6G.
And 7G.
And it's not going to stop on 6G. It's going to go to 7G. So in 5 years, we won't be talking about this. We'll have a panel here and say, gee, are we going to be worrying about 7G? It's coming out. When we have our children not having the #1 killer of babies below 5, brain cancer, but maybe it's going to be catastrophic at that point. At this point, that's the fact. The #1 killer, disease killer, babies below 5 is brain cancer. I'll repeat, that was non-existent a generation ago. Neurological problems, okay? A lot of you are feeling them. Discomfort, you have pain, you can't sleep at night, in part, and if not in great part, depending upon if your head is next to the smart meter on the other side of the wall, or if, by the way, you have live Wi-Fi on in the middle of the night when you're trying to sleep, or how about if you combine those together, and in your neighborhood they have cell towers. Well, you don't even have to be a reader. Just look at the documentary on cell towers in the middle of New York City, where they took mathematicians and statisticians and showed the closer you live to it, the more cancer you have, period. These aren't things we're worrying about. These are things we know about. The worry is that we're not doing enough about them. The next thing you have to understand is fertility. Yes, people will say, well, there's too many people on the planet, but when you're not fertile, you're sick. There's something going on with you. So it's not just representative that you can't have a child. That's a sad enough problem. But how about now you're well on your way to have a wide variety of other diseases. So the immune system's low, the soldiers are low, in your army you lose the war. And the war is every disease known to man. So this is nothing to tiptoe around and think, oh, we're going to get by this. Again, $500 billion is a pretty damn big investment. It's $500 billion. They're going to roll out about $2 to $3 trillion on this in the next 4 to 5 years.
I'll go to an extreme. I love Dr. Powell. He's one of the very first biochemists who actually broke down what happens in an exposure to the cell. He tells you how the calcium penetrates the cell. He tells you how it breaks the cell up. He shows you how it mutates the cell. That's very important. In his words, he thinks in 3 generations, we can't make babies. So the impact of 5G is a bit more catastrophic in nature in that sense. So you can't have babies. It typically takes 10 to 20 years, maybe 30 years before we understand what we introduced into our environment. I think in this case, it's going to be more accelerated.
5 to 10 years.
Because it's going to be 5 and 10 years, and you're going to actually start seeing real evidence of the biological impacts because of the technologies we see. But by that time, it's a little late because we all are now suffering. Over the last 10 years, smoking cigarettes has been down by 50%. And I got to reinforce something people are saying. I don't think it's the cancer that's the worst place. It's the physiological and neurological impacts to the brain itself that controls your body that's going to be worst hit. We already know. We see changes in the frontal lobe, in anger, and all the control functions of the brain that are being impacted just from 4G. 5G, as I mentioned when I started, it's 2 signals hitting the head, not 1. Now there's 2. So, in my opinion, and it's not as bad as Dr. Powell says, but I think somewhere in between is very real, and in 10 years, we're going to have a serious problem that we may not be able to back out of.
So, obviously, it's a
by
big
the way.
problem, and it's urgent. I never entered a football game thinking we were going to lose. That's how I look at it this way. Yeah, we had an undefeated football team. It was good, but never entered thinking we were going to lose. And so my advice here is let's not think of the potential of what may happen in 5 or 10 years. It's good to think about because it's a good question, but it's very productive. And at the same time, we have to get clear that we're not going to lose this battle because it's a battle to protect the total living planet. Everything is at stake. So when we kind of take it that way and know in a way that there's really God in the world and something is going to happen, but we are the key players in that story. So if we take the attitude, we will win, we will prevail, just like we are with smart meters, which was undefeatable at some point, and we really put our energy and attention into it, that's the way we have to go. And with that, I'm going to just give a little prayer about merging the heavens and the earth, because that's exactly what has to happen here. We are talking about the heavens, the sky, and the earth, and it has to come back into harmony. The 20,000 satellites up there are not exactly bringing harmony. So, L'Shem Yakud Kudushabrihu Ushinate Ihad Shemuke Bavavke Yudashlam Shem Kozrael Kolam Amen. That, understand, our prayers do make a difference in affecting the outcome. So we have the power of prayer and we have the power of entering with a positive attitude. We will win. And with that, may you all be blessed.
So a lot of people wish if they could time travel, that if they could go back to 1920, they would have told everyone around them, whatever you do, don't smoke cigarettes, the outcomes are bad. So if someone was going to come back from 30 years from now, and they were going to come back to today, 30 years in the future, and they've had now 30 years from today to see what happens, what exactly would they say about cell phone radiation, wireless in our house, just cell phones and Wi-Fi and anything else wireless? Is it like, again, everyone's trying to decide, is it like a little thing? Is it a medium thing? Is it a big thing? Is it like cigarettes? Like, so, and this is a tough, we really need to know this with precision because this is so inconvenient to not use these devices. So to say to people, oh, just don't use cell phones and Wi-Fi, that's not such a simple thing. So if people are going to make a Herculean change in their life and change their habits and influence their family, they really have to believe that there's a reason. So what are the consequences if we use these devices?
I just wanted to say, I think about this a lot, is like, if my kids get sick from this years from now, and they come back, and will they say, what did you do? Did you know? I mean, I think about, that's what kind of got me basically changing my whole life direction to work on this issue was, what do we do? Wait, I was like, hold on. Brain damage, because there is documented brain damage from exposure, and I worked with kids with brain damage. I knew that, to me, the cancer was like, okay, but not everyone gets cancer. Maybe we can do these things to support, not that I'm saying cancer is okay, what I'm saying is, but the brain damage, if everyone is brain damaged, what do we do? How do we fix that, And so I just think about kids, did you know this? I mean, they're going to ask, did you know? Did anyone mention that there's all this science? It's all right in front of us. It's all here. There's no lack of science. There's just lack of political will. And when the history books are written, what were you doing? That's how I think of this, actually, issue. And that's what I've been telling our policymakers, too, is we're telling you this information, and now what are you going to do about this? You have this information. So.
My feeling is very similar to what you're saying. We are the ones that need to put the pressure on. And I'm going to use the word pressure because I think the politicians need that pressure to pay attention. They need, corporations need the pressure from us, as I say, with these liens, which are legal vehicles that don't require a court that you have to convince that are part of the system. We can put pressure on, but we have to do it. So what's key here is simply making that decision that this is urgent and we have to go for it. And the question is, well, if you knew, why didn't you do something? Well, now you know. So everyone here is part of, I know, therefore I must do.
I think you made a justified comparison, but I think a closer comparison is global warming. So as you see, the powers that be who are in bed with governments worldwide are literally having a handful of complete prostitute research scientists give people a suspicion that global warming may be fabricated. I just read a study just this last week, 5 days ago, on this. So that's more a comparison I'd like to relate to. When you don't see something, now if I came at you with a knife, people would say knives are bad, but you don't see what's hitting you. These are invisible waves. And people have a really difficult time believing in what they see, no less what they don't see. That's what we're facing at this point. So if a person came back, let's imagine it's your child that's not born at this point. Maybe he's going to be born in the next 2 or 3 years and comes back to 2020 an incredibly important year. It's a year of vision. Remember, 2020 is perfect vision. And they said, Christ, in 2020, the one time in history, the other day I was on a show, and Coretta and Martin were friends of mine, and it was 2020. And they said, what about Coretta and Martin? What did they want to do? And I said, harmonize humanity so that everything would be okay. So that's what people are going to ask us. Our child is going to ask my grandchild. I just saw two of my grandchildren. One is 3 weeks old, I just saw today. And they're going to say, Granddad, you know, you were some kind of an authority. How come you didn't get up and yell and scream enough to stop them? Because, by the way, all of my friends have cancer. And when I go to medical conferences and speak, they whisper in my ear because they know who I am. Say, please don't call cancer a catastrophic disease, because today they're trying to water it down that it's a chronic disease. That's how widespread it is. On 2 occasions, they asked me not to call a catastrophic disease a catastrophic disease, and I said, if you want me to go out and speak, I'm on the schedule here, I'll go out. If you don't want me to say what I'm here to say, I won't go out. So find somebody else to substitute. That's what people need to do. Do you think we're fabricating these things? Do you think we came here tonight to make things up? Are we a comedy routine, or are we serious people that are trying to save your ass and everyone else's ass? That's a real question we have here. And the later is true. And you've got to have enough courage to want to save your own butt. And forget your own butt if you're as selfish as that individual that Stephen mentioned a while ago. If you don't care about your children, your grandchildren, your neighbors, your friends, well, you deserve to be zapped by this stuff as far as I'm concerned.
When you asked the question, Steve, engendered in my mind was I was a reporter looking back 20 or 30 years, and because I'm optimistic, I truly believe we're going to raise and we're going to fix it. It's going to be in the courts. That's why I was so interested in Italy. That's why I'm so interested in Berkeley. There's actually physical actions happening in the world. It's a start, but if all of us start behind it, moving this groundswell of support with the problems we see with the technology, I hope it looks like the cancer that was caused by cigarette smoking. Look at the history. It's pretty clear. 30 years ago, I smoked cigarettes, right? And I thought it was a good thing. I was a big man, yeah, right? Exactly. Big man on the campus.
Marlboro
man. And that's how they got us. Do you know that research at that time knew exactly the links between cancer and smoking? And so I'm optimistic that all of us rising to the occasion will bring this to the courts eventually, and it will stop in some form. And by the way, there's so many different technologies that really replaces what they're doing, and they're just not considering it because it's financially driven by motivated service providers.
But just to clarify, what is the risk of a cell phone and Wi-Fi in your house? In other words, most people don't think it's that big a deal. So is it a big deal to use this? What's going to happen if you use a cell phone a minute a day, 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, 20 minutes, 30, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours? In other words, forget about like just saying you should do this, you should do that. We're in a very realistic society. We have family, we have friends. We want to understand, just like with cigarettes, how much cell phone and Wi-Fi can we tolerate before you're saying we're going to get cancer and all these bad diseases. I mean, we don't really believe. We don't believe you that this is a dangerous thing. We think in extremeness it is, but overall everyone's using it. It doesn't seem that bad.
It doesn't seem that bad, but look at the data. Look at the statistics. Look at the diseases that we have today we didn't even have 20, 30, 40 years ago. So of course we're seeing the effect, but it's again being waylaid by special interests who are telling you, oh no, they'd rather spend hundreds of millions of dollars dissuading you from their technology being dangerous than they would correcting it. I mean, there's devices you can put on phones that are actually legitimate, that have been studied. And why doesn't a cell company say, hey, we'll be the first cell company in the world that's going to put technology in that reduces it? The only one that attempted to do it half-heartedly was Samsung. And they didn't even advertise it, because what it does is bring up to the public, international public, wait, we have a dangerous technology. How about if you created that? And what technologies are there? I mean, look what happened to poor Tesla. Tesla was literally telling us that they could give us free energy, that the waves that he was speaking about are the waves that Gabriel spoke about, that universal frequency that was proven by a colleague and a friend of mine at University of California, Los Angeles, Dr. Hunt, that governs everything on the planet. And so they knew that. So you could probably use natural frequencies without any side effect. They may even help you.
So, the latest research I've seen, if you're using a cell phone for more than 20 minutes a day, there seems to be an increased effect on brain and heart cancers. So it's that little bit. And obviously, people are using it a whole lot more than that. So it is really, really important to pay attention. Now, we don't have Wi-Fi in our home. I don't have Wi-Fi in my office. And we can also model, is what I'm saying. No Wi-Fi. We exist. It happens. And things go well. And on different cell phones that happen, we put the tach-in disk and a few other different things. And really, you're not weakened. So you can do those things. The bigger picture, though, is, again, getting clear. Even though we can be clever, we can help a few people do it, but we've got to stop it at a major level of the issue. That's really the task that we have, because knowledge is power, and we have to we have that moral responsibility, really, to use it to create a better world and protect our children and grandchildren, so that really the evolution of humanity can continue, because that's really what's at stake here. This is not an accident without, let's say, as I mentioned, the spiritual part. When your brain is being altered by these forces like 5G, it's very hard to kind of reach higher spiritual levels. So we're talking evolution, not just physiological evolution, but mental and spiritual evolution. So it's actually, again, a big deal, and as little as 20 minutes. So we model it. We don't have Wi-Fi, literally in my office or in our home, and we do quite well. You can actually go back to landlines. You've heard of those, right? There isn't a problem using a landline. So we can do those things, and we begin to model for people what's possible. Oh my God, you don't have Wi-Fi? My goodness, you're using a landline? Yeah, that's right. And then you start explaining it, but it's an example that starts to turn the tide.
And the research that's looked at people using cell phones for over 10 years have found that it is the heavy long-term users that have, depending on the studies, 2 to 3 times the risk for brain cancer. Now, what was heavy use in these studies was 20 to 30 minutes a day. So that's because when you're going, yes, because at the time, remember, if you're looking at people for a long time, way back, we didn't use cell phones like we use them now. But the other thing is, and Dr. Hardell's research shows this, but for the children, the numbers could be up to 5 times increase. They're more vulnerable. So, and that's only looking at studies that, didn't go past 20 years. So, I mean, kids are using cell phones all the time. When I say, our recommendation used to be, well, text rather than talk on the phone. But kids are texting thousands of texts a day, and they're sending pictures and videos and all of these things. All of those things are going through our bodies. all of that information, every time you send a picture, or these TikTok, this new thing TikTok that I just don't even, I can't keep up with all these things, but that's videos that are being made, moving through space, going through people, and through birds, and through our trees to reach the cell tower, affecting every living being. So I just think we have to use common sense. Common sense will bring us back. We're losing our common sense because what I hear from industry is we have to balance the needs, like in schools, since this is a school panel, the needs of the educational system with your concerns. But how, right? I mean, how can we balance anything on our children's healthy future? What sense does this even make? If there is a chicken sandwich in the refrigerator, whatever, something, you generally, let's think of something with meat that someone has in their refrigerator, and it's been 2 or 3 days, you don't feed it to the kids. You just don't. That's what the government says not to do. It's going bad. It's bringing all these things. You can tell that to policymakers. I do that all the time. I say, would you feed that to your kids if it's been several days? Now, the husband might eat it. That's often what happens in families. But like, it's like, oh, or you put it in soup or something, but you don't feed it to the kids. You don't risk your kids. I mean, you're being told by scientists, by people who are doing this research, we have a problem. How, there's no balancing. The only thing you want to balance is our health. How can technology be more important than that? If they can't get a good education, if their brains are going to be damaged, what good is the education? I mean, I don't understand the logic that's often used, and I think we just have to bring it down to common sense and use that.
What we're saying is, call it common sense, but it's actually a moral sense as well.
Yes.
And there's a morality that we're talking about. And human life should not be endangered for commercial gain. What we're also saying.
Oh, no, no, right now. Sorry.
As Theodora mentioned, heavy use, 10 years, 2 to 3 times cancer. If you're within 1,000 feet of a cell tower, you're 2 to 3 times more likely to get a cancer. I'm not going to talk about that. I want to answer your question, Steve. What's the problem with the router in the bedroom? What's the problem with the cell phones on right next to your pillow? Let me tell you what it can be. If you're very sensitive to these things, the brain and its brain pattern is interrupted. In severe cases, you may be walking around in sleep, brainwaves, sleeping with awake waves. It can get that extreme. Why is that a problem? It's a problem because you're not getting balanced sleep. So your circadian rhythm all of a sudden is all disrupted. And what happens when circadian rhythm is disrupted? The mitochondrial that gets rebuilt in the middle of the night is not getting rebuilt. So there becomes a vicious cycle in health simply because you have a router in the bedroom. And that's more the problems you have to be concerned about. How do you deal with the environment you're living in? Because it really does affect your body, and it can debilitate real fast with that kind of risk.
So you're saying we should reroute our priorities?
Yeah. Right.
So when I go home and I tell someone, oh, I heard this stuff, and they said all this stuff about wireless radiation, and they say, yeah, I don't know, some studies say it's good, some studies say it's bad. How many studies have been done, and how many studies have been done, and how many said that it's not a problem? How many credible studies said it's not a problem? How many said it is a problem? Is your opinion based on 3 studies, 5? How many studies have been done on this subject, and what was the results of them?
Let me intervene, because the ones that impress me are the ones I can articulate the best. So go back to Dr. Davis. Dr. Davis worked with Stanford University and basically showed that young women historically now are putting cell phones into their brassiere. And I hope none of you listening in the room or on the air is doing that. So Stanford actually showed the shape of the cancers. What's the name of that cancer? It's a new form of cancer.
It was unusual with several unusual cancer. It was breast cancer.
It was in the
but
shape
it was
of the battery.
A multifocal cancer
so-
that they don't normally see. And it was also in a location under the phone when normally you see them more off. So it was an unusual place for it to be right towards the center of the chest.
Second one that was mind-boggling and clear, Yale University did a study where men put a cell phone into their pocket within 30 seconds, not 30 minutes, not 30 days, 30 seconds. 40% of the sperm was neutered. Now, the guys who were carrying the cell phones in your pocket, because you don't have a purse to put it in, didn't want that to be true. Just 3 or 4 years ago, Exeter University, which is an Ivy League school in England, came up with the same exact number. So this is a done deal. You have 2 independent studies like that. These are the kinds, how many studies? Thousands, maybe 25,000.
Yeah.
But these are the ones people understand. In the shape of the battery, and sperm count 40% less in 30 seconds.
Okay, so assuming that there's 20,000 studies, the results have been poor, what exactly do I do to get the maximum protection to myself? What is everything I could do if I don't want any of the bad results from Wi-Fi, from cell phones, from any wireless technology? Take me through everything we could possibly do to completely protect ourselves. What are the very best things we could do? What's our options?
I'm going to say start with your bedroom, actually, just beginning the process. You've just heard about this. It might seem a little overwhelming. Start with your sleep so you don't have those disrupted brain waves, of which have been replicated over and over again in research. And even industry actually agrees that brain waves change during sleep from this radiation. So take a look. What do you have in your room? Do you sleep with your phone? The phone should be off, and it should not be under your pillow. It should be away from the bed. You get a battery-powered alarm clock to wake you up. Do you have a router in your bedroom? You have to first notice do an assessment. Do you have a virtual, one of those speakers, Echoes or Alexas and those things? They should not be in your bedroom. At night, you can turn the Wi-Fi off. Figuring out how to hardwire is the next step. I've done it. I don't have Wi-Fi in my house, but you can't do it tonight. So you're going to have to learn how to do that. I hope everyone learns and gets the technology to do that. But in the meantime, you can turn the wireless antennas off at night. Do you have electrical cords? Lamps, all of this, actually, you want to decrease the electrical fields as well. You don't want extension cords running under your bed. Or I went to someone's house, they had an old alarm clock, probably from when they were teenagers, and it was right by their head, and there's very strong electrical fields that are coming off of that as well. So you just don't want anything electric in your space. And that's the first step. Then learning how to, I don't know if any of you else want to speak too, but learning how to reduce exposure to your cell phone. I mean, I would recommend not using your cell phone less, significantly less, and using more wired technology. So we have, well, actually, I can't get a corded landline because they don't have them in our community. So what I had to do is get a corded landline that goes off the router, which is wired and doesn't have wireless. So I tried to get a copper line. This is another lawsuit that's happening right now, the regulators versus the FCC. Everyone has been paying on our monthly bills for years money to maintain our copper lines. But the wireless industry moved it into paying for wireless. And now if you try to get a copper line, you can't in many communities. Yeah, and that's a whole lawsuit happening, regulators versus the FCC, because this money has been shifted for not what it was supposed to be for. But you still can get off of your internet provider a corded line. Make sure it is not a home cordless phone. So when I first learned about this issue, I got rid of everything, but I didn't realize that cordless phones, the kind that is in your home, the base is emanating radiation all the time, wireless radiation. Some people are sleeping with this near their heads. Get a regular, the kind with the curly, that kind of phone is the phone that you want to do the majority of your voice calls on. And so you kind of want to assess, swap out. There's a lot of things you can do with your cell phone. It doesn't mean it's safe, because it really, safe is 100% the wired technology, but you can do things like turn off antennas you're not using. Turn off the Wi-Fi if you're not using that. Turn off the mobile hotspot. Turn off the Bluetooth. Your phone is always on and radiating even when you're not on the phone. So you have to learn information to know how to reduce exposure in that way. And I see a lot of kids, and everyone asks like about the little white things that they have in their ears. Those are also emitting radio frequency radiation, and they actually have a slightly different kind of technology where one is connecting to the other one, and then it connects to the phone. So that's going through your head. And plus you have the phone, which is radiating, that's probably on your body. I was just dismayed. I came up here on the train. Every teenager had that in their head. And I thought, oh no, I don't get out much. And because I'm working so much all the time, I just, getting into the city, I just was shocked at that. And teens need to be educated on this. There's also, we haven't even talked about this, we've talked about so many things, but there's research showing impacts to hearing, actually, the hearing and hearing.
They say it's actually worse than the walls of amplifiers we had in the 60s.
It's out of India, if you're interested on ear, and also to the regions, like in animal research, actually the regions of the brain that deal with hearing are impacted. So the list is long.
I agree with those things. You control your environment, and by reducing all those sources of emissions in your environment, improves the probability that you're not going to be influenced negatively by those exposures. But I'd like to mention a little bit more than that. It's the distance and time you use it. Distance is your friend. If you get farther away from those signals, the less likely it influences the body. The other thing is time. If you use a cell phone for 5 minutes, you'll never die. You use it for 3 hours a day, 24 hours a day, it now becomes accumulative to the body, and the body then has the more serious actions. So you really want to monitor time and distance. But the most important in all of this is, you've heard me talk about immune systems. You heard me talk about suppression of body responses. And I'm going to let Brian talk a little bit about that, because that is so important, more than ever before, for maintaining health. Brian, why don't you mention that?
So what we do know, and it was mentioned, but let's pull it together, that what differentiates you from all other life forms is your DNA. And these frequencies damage the DNA. That is the closest friend and ally to the immune system. So every single person who has ever recovered from every single disease any human has had through the history of humanity, it was their immune system that did it. Let's go back. The DNA and the immune system are being altered. Now, where does the immune system greatly come from? The intestinal tract. Healthy bacteria in the intestinal tract. And I mentioned this the other day, but it's worth telling, because God has a better plan than we do sometimes. Mother's milk has colostrum in it. In the first minutes a baby suckles the mother, colostrum comes in, providing healthy, completely perfect, balanced, healthy bacteria if you live 150 years. That's a fact. We know in the past that Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola can disturb that. They look like Boy and Girl Scout camps compared to these frequencies. And so if it disturbs and opens up cells and allows calcium to interchange with that, as has been represented and true. Can you imagine what it does to the bacteria? You're 2/3 bacteria. When I look at your physical body, so when you think somebody's sexy, think for a minute, 2/3 bacteria. Just wanted to be compatible bacteria at that point. So taking an appropriate probiotic is powerfully important. The distance is powerfully important, and I don't think we could have started any better than with what you said. She gave the most practical advice in this area. She's right. Don't use it. Use it as less as possible, and get it away from where you're hanging out 9 hours a day, 10 hours a day. How about your workplace? You're there 8, 9 hours a day. Do you have to have a workplace where you and your coworkers are being zapped? We brought a physicist onto the Hippocrates property, and he created a shield on the Hippocrates property. And you can do these things. We worked with Russians and Germans who have the state-of-the-art technology. It's called high pulse. I never take this off. It's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Scientifically validated, and it's easy. You put it on. That's all it takes. But that doesn't mean you put it on and use 2 cell phones at your head. I think it's worth telling you that governments in the past did have a little bit of morality. And a guy that you'd never expected was called Bill Clinton. Because how Dr. Davis started is Bill Clinton, she worked with him. And he wondered if cell phones created brain cancer. So tell the rest of that story. You know that story? Okay, I'll tell it. Dr. Davis and I talked about this. So she was actually the woman who oversaw the science that was being done during the 8-year administration. He commissioned a $25 million study on cell phones' effect in potentiality with brain tumors. The study came back, said, no way, doesn't work, impossible. And Dr. Davis and her husband retired several years ago, and she's a prolific lover of science. And she reads it and reads it and reads it, and she's reading this study, and they were so sloppy they didn't segue the study. If you're going to cheat on a study, you have to be sophisticated enough to try to hide it. They didn't hide it. So the first part of the study said, yeah, it looks like it's doing it, and overnight, that was it. So she happened to hand-select scientists and called the gentleman that she knew at some level, and he basically admitted to it, the pressure that came in at that point. That's how Dr. Davis became incredibly upset about this, and literally is the #1 advocate in the scientific community, at least the original #1 advocate. Now, thank God there's a chorus of people coming. So you've got to protect your body by being healthy. You've got to avoid all of these things. You've got to make sure there's pockets, there's bags you can put. My wife and I have one you can put two or three cell phones in and put that into your purse so you're not carrying it on your body or in your brassiere. There's actually plastic that you put on your lap if you're going to use a laptop computer, and it does protect you. And there are these devices. There are screens. You currently may have a smart meter. There are screens that dramatically reduce the radiation that comes from that until we pull that off your house. And by law, you can pretty much demand they pull it off your house.
So everyone has covered it really eloquently, so there's not a whole lot to add. What I look at is a way of life that we have to recreate. So instead of using cell phones, use a landline. Do the best you can to get that in. If you're going to use a cell phone, first of all, I never carry a cell phone. I carry like a little purse. So it's enough away, not totally away from my body, but enough away that it's actually not on my physical body. I have, as I mentioned, different things like the tachyon disc on the cell phone that I've shown neutralize that 92% of the time. In terms of the 5G, I talked about the overall pervasive approach we need, which is we have to cover our windows with discs that can deflect it, which we're showing. where using the CBD special oil that's tachinized, that rebuilds our field. Because what we've heard again and again, we are looking at 5G disrupting our field and penetrating our skin and deeper and creating lots and lots of free radicals. So we need to increase the amount of free radicals. Antioxidants to protect that. We need to do things to build and keep rebuilding our immune system. And so it's like a whole lifestyle that we're talking about, but we also need to be more politically active. But I'm mentioning there's certain things you can wear that we're developing to help really make your field strong enough so it doesn't really penetrate. And for your house and for your car, and also get the smart meters out and put neutralizers on the smart meters, which you mentioned, the little network, and those are good, but they're not as good. I've been testing them, yeah. So taking them out of the house. We actually need to be assertive, but think about it as a lifestyle. I mentioned in a previous lecture about being fastidious. People who are fastidious live longer and are healthier. It's one of the top 5 qualities for longevity. So it's called working it into your life as a lifestyle, not something separate from your life, because that's what it is, but also moving forward to make it stop happening, to become like Brussels, where they outlawed 5G. That's what we ultimately really need to do and put as much pressure now that we can. So that's the whole picture of a lifestyle that we're talking about, that we're creating, that's not cell phone dependent, and we can still live without it. I've lived for years now without Wi-Fi. We don't have it in our office. Okay, fine. If we need to do something, we'll go to the library or something like that. But basically, change your lifestyle to no longer put the cell phone at the center of how you're living and communicating. And the more people can move in that way, the better it will be. So, and then we need to pray as much as possible that there'll be more of a divine intervention, which I believe there will be, that's going to make it so obvious they'll be forced to stop it just because it's so obviously bad. So I appreciate you. I really appreciate, Steve, the questions you asked are very provocative in a really good way. And may, again, everyone here be blessed that we have the courage to change our lifestyle, so not dealing with the cell phones is not part of it. I mean, I don't even think about a cell phone in my bedroom. That's not even a possibility. It's like, it's 3 rooms away and it's turned off. And that's the way we do it. But it becomes part of your thinking, is what I'm talking about. So, like, of course you're going to turn the cell phone off when you go to bed. Of course you're going to take out the electricity and so forth and so on. And, going solar, living off the grid that way is important. My whole office is solar, and that minimizes a lot of that need for protection from the 5G, and we don't need to have any kind of 5G devices to make it work. So change your life to a more simple approach. So may everybody be blessed that we're inspired to do that. Yes. Hope.
I want to just add one more thing to that, which is that we need to talk to, our organization doesn't talk specifically about products, but the issue is that there are many people who can't afford some of the things, like in the home I lived in before, when I was in a condo, I did have to shield one of the walls with a material because our neighbor had a router right there and it worked well. I had it professionally measured. You should always be professionally measuring when you do that. But it's really not an affordable option for most people, and especially the work. We haven't even talked about work. We've talked about school, but what about the teachers? What about people in coffee shops? What about all of the people working in cleaning all of these buildings? they have several devices on them so that their bosses can be in touch with them, et cetera, et cetera. And we have to start addressing that too, because a lot of people don't have control over their workplace environment. And so getting the unions involved is really important, and really having them look at this issue so that they can advocate for workers, contacting the Department of Labor. I mean, all of this is work to be done. But that's why the personal is the political, and we have to get involved in fixing this, because there's so many people who are unaware and are going to be affected if we don't. And the communications worker of America, like the tower workers, the communications workers are actually already on this issue and saying, some of them, we're worried about these towers. We're worried about being in contact with this. The electrical workers are saying, I'm worried about working on an electrical line, and I'm right near a 5G near an antenna, because you're putting these antennas on all of our utility poles. We're up high in the air, and it's going to affect our bodies. And there are many injured workers because of this, actually, because of the antennas. So.
Now, there's a website, I have nothing to do with them at all, but I've purchased from them. It's called lessemf.com, and they sell meters, and I bought this meter. So if we buy their meters, they're fairly expensive, but whatever, they're a meter, and I walk around my house, and it's registering low, does that mean I'm safe? Or if there's a Wi-Fi 200 feet away, and or 100 feet away, or 50 feet away, and it's not registering high on this acoustimeter, am I safe? Don't have to worry about this issue? Or are you saying that there's still low levels permeating me, and what's the answer? If the meter's not showing that it's strong, am I safe or not? Am I safe or not?
What does the meter indicate?
How much?
Is it measuring hertz?
It's
or
measuring. Someone else want to answer this for me? What is it measuring?
Well,
The
it depends
acoustimeter.
on your meter.
It's an acoustimeter
Oh,
measuring.
acoustimeter is measuring radio frequency
measuring
radiation.
Yes.
So there are different meters that measure different frequencies. So you could measure radio frequency, which is the wireless. You can measure extremely low frequency fields with a milligauss. You can measure electrical fields. There's some measuring devices for dirty electricity. You can get an oscilloscope, and this goes down a whole road of complication that we haven't even opened up this issue. But I think that the first thing to do is to get meters to understand what you're being exposed to. If everyone had a meter, this would be changed immediately, because people would be like, what? That's what I did. I got a meter, and I went to my office. I had no wireless, except I didn't realize that the cordless phone was wireless, because I just didn't know. And I was like, oh, no. And that was right in my office, right in front of my head all this time. Then we can sort of know what's there. There is research that has shown low levels also have an effect, but we know that, we have to do what we can do and then take the next step. So that's what, we have to start somewhere with our own devices, I think.
You have to be careful with cheap meters.
Yeah.
They're
Yes, you do.
so inaccurate that you think you're in severe danger when it's almost nothing. Oftentimes, in terms of milligauss, it's micro milligauss. It's so low, and you have machines that are really, really inaccurate. They sometimes can be misleading. They're a good indicator maybe, but you got to be careful that you don't panic about what you see, because we often see many who misread the environment they are in. They're safe, but they think they're panicking because the meters are indicating a problem. But generally speaking, low milligauss, 2 milligauss or less is safe. Volts per meter squared, probably 3 volts per meter squared or less. And you're roughly safe. You're not going to eliminate it, not today, but it's roughly considered safe.
And are you at a greater risk of a cell phone being on when you're in your car because it's searching for a signal than if you're just at your home? Is it the same thing, or is it a greater risk?
When you're in a car, cell phones modulate in 3 levels, trying to find the cell tower. A moving car is metal around, so it's a floating, as a floating ground. It's absorbing the signal, so it's at its maximum levels, it's transmitting at the highest levels, and here's where distance plays a big game. If you have it in your pocket, it's touching your body. If you have it on the passenger side, as far away as you can, it's still dangerous, but the distance has reduced the exposure.
But you have to remember, the newer cars are moving cell phones. So my car is a cell phone. Yeah. My car has antennas on it. So the reality is, the thing I've been told works for this, and I haven't checked this, but it made sense to me, is that you literally take wire, copper wire, you screw it into the back of the car, and it grounds the car. You're going to have to change it periodically, because rubbing across the roadway will eventually wear it down. So just ground it that way. And the side effect is, when the radar comes after you, it throws it off sometimes.
Benefit.
In terms of the cars, we are developing like tack-in mats, so you can be on that and be protected. And like, even, you know, like you're driving a Tesla, it's one big battery. And
Yeah.
so we have to pay more attention to that. I'm actually really looking at that for those reasons. But basically, that's part of the overall protection, is protecting yourself in your car. And I think we're going to be able to do it with the, you know, the rubber mats, but they're not quite rubber. They'll be tackinized, so when you're on it, you're going to be protected.
Is an electric car with a battery more of a concern regarding EMFs and health than a regular car?
Depends upon how the company works it. So we go back to, when I talked to the Tesla company before I purchased one, they literally said why we chose aluminium, in great part was that it's not conductive of it. And in there's devices, not devices, little round disc you should put into any electric car. And hybrid cars are in part electric too. So you don't have to have complete electric, it can be partially electric. Pretty much every new car, not everyone, almost every new car, is either a hybrid or moving electric. And they anticipate in the next 10 years there'll be, in this country, 20 to 30 million more electric cars. They're going to phase out motors. Some countries literally have said this is it. By 2035, we can't sell motorized cars at that point. So this is where we're going, so we have to really consider this. This is a lot of science has to be done on it.
They're turning, something that you can do is contact, and every car is different, but you can have the antennas in some cars turned off when you talk to your manufacturer. But I know that with the battery cars, they've gotten better, and they are aware of this issue. And I had read a report, BMW was looking into this and trying to figure out how could they reduce the extremely low frequency fields in the car, because there can be a portion, especially in the back on one side, where it can be higher. And I think that's why we have to use the power of our pocketbook and talk to companies and say, I want a low EMF car. What, you know, you can do this. You have to do this.
So why don't we each make...
My experience with Tesla and some of these other companies, they may tell you what you want to hear. That's true. And
To measure it.
really, we need to measure it.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, most electrical cars do need to be modified with our own technology, which is why I'm talking about the tachinized mats that kind of stop the technology. So there's different things you can do, but you do need to do something. Even though they'll say, oh, it's low, it's not really a problem. As far as I'm concerned, it's still a problem.
Right across from here, they have discs that help with the electric cars, because I've measured mine 5 different occasions, had engineers measure it 2 other times, and those discs do help.
If each of you would make a final 2-minute closing comment on anything you want to say.
I'll reinforce what I said earlier. You can't rely on anybody else to make sure you're safe. And you own the obligation of, as the architect of your destiny, particularly when it comes to your environment. You manage it, you control it, you can turn things off, you can put things aside. You have the control of how it will influence you and your family. So accept that responsibility. Don't expect anyone else to do it for you.
The last decade, smoking went down 50%. The ozone layer exists because governments 2 generations ago came together and said, humanity's on the way out, and we corrected that. And there's been many, many events throughout human history we can point to. And I know the reason that Stephen put together the real truth about health. It wasn't to alarm you, to make you upset, but it was to provoke you. And we're sitting here, and there's thousands of people listening to us as we speak, but there are millions and millions and millions of people around the world. We're about at the tipping point now. Before I knew what I was taught, I used to think it took 51% of the population for things to change. Now we know it's about 18%, and that's when things change. I estimate now we're about 12.5 to 13.5. So as I travel the globe and listen to the movements and see a sweet 14-year-old autistic girl who leads the world and puts leaders in their place, I have a lot of hope. As I see people who could be retired, but they're great scientists and great humanitarians and they're out trying to help you, I have hope for that. And I think what Gabriel said tonight, and for some of you it may seem a little out of place, is powerful. There's so much good evidence today on how prayer changes things. One of our colleagues, Larry Dosey, became the scientist in that. And if you pray for somebody you've never met before with an intent, we can medically monitor them and show that their immune system or their heart actually changes, even if they're thousands of miles apart in what they're doing. So don't feel victim anymore. Feel empowered to be human, because humanity is very powerful. I'm going to tell you that. There's nothing we can't do. All the great things we've done, and we've reduced ourselves to thinking of a handful of insane things that we're doing now. We have done such extraordinary things, and we can correct it again, but you've got to get a little God back in your heart again.
Very nicely said, Brian. I think what we're talking about are multiple levels. So for our own lifestyle, being fastidious about our electromagnetic, our 2, 3, and 4, and 5G, which is at least 100 times more powerful, creating a lifestyle that protects us from it, as we've mentioned, with the different technologies and how we live in our houses and keeping our cell phones in another room is important. The next thing is to remember what Margaret Mead said: a small amount of people can make determined people can change the world. Now, whether it's 1% or 18%, it's still a small amount. And I think even 1% can do it. So it's an intent to actually make it work, make life on the planet work. So I talked about the global electric circuit. We talked about the Schumann resonance, which all are being affected by the 5G and the 20,000 satellites. But there's also the global brain, which is more on the mental level. So when enough people are putting into the global brain peace and creating a healthy living planet by all that we do, we again begin to shift the global brain. And behind that is the power of the divine in our lives that helps us shift the global brain back into harmony for humanity, but the evolution, spiritual evolution for humanity. So we can do it. Amen.
Wait.
Oh,
Ask questions after outside, they'll be available outside.
Technology has progressed so fast. There is no other type of environmental exposure that has so rapidly saturated every aspect of our lives, every age group, than wireless radiation. And we absolutely can fix this. There's no lack of science, but what we need is political will and courage and hope, and looking at all of the other people who are taking action on this can help. I hope that, like in the talk I gave, I hope that can really inspire you working on this issue, knowing what's happening in other countries, knowing what's happening in the United States, using those examples, because we need to help the elected officials who represent us to do the right thing. And there's a lot that we can do in our communities at a local level. So I hope if you haven't ever gotten involved before in your community, now is the time to find out who are your elected officials, talk to them, start talking to your neighbors about this, and share this information so that we can fix this. And I fully believe that we will win and fix this. Yeah.
Before we end, I want to really acknowledge Steve for the great job he's done in putting this panel together.